The Falcons continue to invest in their defense on day 3 of the draft, but is everybody going to wind up making the final roster cut?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, who's going to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. People call me Sirius Black. Some people call me Mr. Drew. Some people call me the iron that sharpens the iron. And even some people call me the Jolly Green Giant, but I'm also known as Mr. AKA. Been covering the Falcons for too many years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. And I appreciate each and every one of you, whether you were, looking at falcfans.com, all 5 of you, or this is your first episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, and you plan to become an everydayer of this pod, you make it your first listen, first watch each and every day, and all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe, follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we will be breaking down the day 3 picks, right? If you want the complete draft class breakdown and grades and whatnot, that's probably something that we'll do tomorrow, right? And if you want to know my grade, mama always say, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. So that gives you kind of a heads up of what my grade will wind up being. But if we do talk about that tomorrow, I'll explain why it's probably not as glowing a grade as some of you would probably prefer. But let's talk about these day 3 picks, and we'll start off with the 4th round selection in Brandon Dorlus. I know some people, thought this, I saw some people on Twitter being like, this is my favorite pick of the Falcons draft, right? This is the player that plenty of people were big fans of. The D tackle from Oregon, 6'3", 283, good athleticism for D tackle, but he kind of played all over the place at Oregon. Some edge rush, some inside 3-tech D tackle. Some people called him a tweener because, that term usually has a negative connotation for a player that doesn't really have a true position. But I think here in Atlanta, his position will be playing more on the interior, sort of a 3-4 defensive end, which is kind of, I guess, a hybrid between, a true edge rusher and a true D tackle, playing, over the tackle and whatnot. But, haven't done a deep dive on his film, but what little I've seen, he's a fun player. I joked with somebody earlier today that he's kind of the player that people hoped Marlon Davidson would be. And I know some of you guys are like, don't invoke that name. How dare you, Aaron? But I think he has that inside outside versatility. I think he comes into the league with a lot more polish than Marlon Davidson did. Davidson had tools and traits, but I think Dorlus has a little bit more polish along with the tools and traits. Oregon did, as I mentioned before, move him all over the place. According to Pro Football Focus, about 35% of his snaps over the last 3 years came as an edge rusher. About 27% came over the tackle. So basically like a 3-4, 5-tech defensive end. And about 39% of his snaps came on the interior, where he was lined up either in the A gap or B gap. And so I imagine the Falcons will probably play him a lot more over the tackle and also kick him on the interior, especially on passing downs. He was 286 at his pro day, 283 at the combine. I imagine the Falcons will probably put on a little bit more bulk and get him in the 290s so they can maybe hold up a little bit better against the run. But from what I can tell, he's a pretty good run defender, more of a penetrator than I'm going to just hold the point of attack and anchor. But we talked about yesterday how Ruke Orhorhoro, the Falcons' 2nd round pick out of Clemson, is kind of a David Onyemata, heir apparent in terms of similar style of players. And I think Dorlus' style is more similar to Grady Jarrett, as more of that sort of shorter, sort of, 3-tech sort of penetrator upfield guy with a little bit more juice as a pass rusher. So I think you can kind of look at Dorlus as, that sort of guy that you could, groom as a potential replacement, right? And one of the other things we talked about on yesterday's episode and, previous episodes was, kind of my hope that the Falcons would come out of this draft with like 3 or 4 defensive linemen and edge rushers. And they did just that, getting Zion Logue in addition to the 2 they got yesterday in Dorlus. And so it just confirms that Terry and Raheem are everydayers, like so many of you. And, we do appreciate you, Terry and Raheem, for listening to the podcast. We may not always appreciate all the decisions you make from the draft standpoint, but we do appreciate you listening to the pod. So, I think the big question with Dorlus and a lot of these investments that the Falcons have made on D-line is like, what does the D-line rotation actually look like this year? Right. And, my best guess is you'll probably have 6 guys active on game days. We know Grady and Onyemata will be 2 of those guys. I think it's a pretty safe guess to think Rook, Aurora, the 2nd round pick, and Zach Harrison will be 2 more. Another spot will be whoever wins the nose tackle battle. And that's right now, that's a 3-way battle between Eddie Goldman, LaCale London, and Zion Logue, the 6th round pick that we'll talk about later. And so you have 1 more spot available on the active roster potentially. And that's probably a 3-way battle right now between Brandon Dorlus, Kentavious Street, and TQ Graham. So, 1 or more of those guys is probably potentially a cap cut at the end of the training camp. And I don't think it's going to be Dorlus, right? So, it does mean that Street and maybe TQ are potentially on the roster bubble. So we'll see, right? But, they could wind up keeping 7 or 8 of these guys. So maybe both of those guys stick it. A lot of that will depend on how guys perform in August. But, there should be fierce competition along the D line. And we had similar conversations last summer, right? Where there was a step up in terms of the quality of D linemen that the Falcons had in training camp. And, I like seeing that be a continuation into 2023 because it wasn't looking great, a week ago when it came to the depth, like the depth. Yeah, we talked about it. But, to me, the idea of the Falcons having, solid roster in NFL, quality rotational players, and those guys are getting cut every summer, right? Like that's a good thing to me, right? Like I want to be that team that's like the Eagles that, can afford to be like, okay, we're about a week away from cuts. Who wants Kentavious Street? Who, being willing to afford to trade guys like Hassan Reddick. The Jets are another team. They trade John Franklin Myers today, a guy that started for them the last like 4 or 5 years. So I want to have that type of depth and that type of strong D lineman. And I think, drafting a guy like Brandon Dorlus along with the other investments the Falcons have made on, the last 2 days of the draft is a step towards that. But we'll continue today's episode talking about the 5th round linebacker. Is he just a special teams player, or is there, a starting potential in his future? And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But guys, the NFL draft is where NFL teams are looking to find the quality professionals that fit the right role. And the same is true for your small business. And LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the right professionals with the right tools faster and for free for your small business. And LinkedIn isn't just any old job board, right? They're helping you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those that aren't actively seeking a new job, but just might be open for that perfect role to slide right into your small business's, starting rotation, so to speak. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. That means basically they're only looking on LinkedIn. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place, right? So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode of your favorite Locked On podcast is brought to you by the best meal kit service in the game, Home Chef. No more having to answer the dreaded question, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Thanks to Home Chef and their chef-designed recipes that are delivered directly to my door, all pre-packaged, pre-portioned. They even peel the garlic cloves for you. And each recipe, one of my favorites, blackened mahi, comes with a full page of easy-to-read instructions that include customization options and pictures to guide you along the way through the step-by-step process so you don't have to ask, is that what chard looks like? I cannot recommend Home Chef enough, especially right now, because for a limited time, Home Chef is giving Locked On listeners 18 free meals free dessert for life, and of course, free shipping on your first box if you head to homechef.com/lockedon today. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. Yes, you heard that right. Homechef.com/lockedon. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert.
So let's talk about the Falcons' 5th round linebacker, JD Bertrand of Notre Dame. And I didn't get too deeply into his film, but did watch a little bit of him. He is a local guy hailing from Blessed Trinity Catholic School in Roswell, Georgia. He was originally recruited by Georgia. Then they decommitted him, and then he decided, I'm going to go to Notre Dame. And he wound up walking on and earning a scholarship. Eagle Scout growing up, academic Heisman finalist, 2-time team captain, 3-year starter at Mike linebacker for the Irish. And, he checks all the intangibles, all the character and makeup boxes that we know Terry and company love. I watched a little bit of him, and from what I saw, game is similar to Nate Landman, right? Not a guy that's going to be a great athlete, not the guy that's the biggest in the world. He didn't really test, so we don't know exactly how athletic he is because of a foot injury that he suffered from this past spring. But I haven't seen anybody that thinks he's a great athlete. And I watched the film and I didn't necessarily come across thinking he was a great athlete. Certainly a functional athlete, similar to kind of Nate Landman, good enough to play in the league and be effective. I think he's a guy that you could probably slide into that 4th linebacker spot that's kind of vacant right now because of Andre Smith sort of holding that spot last year and being an unsigned free agent. And that guy's primarily a special teams guy. And, Bertrand did do that at Notre Dame. He had 13 special teams tackles over the past 4 years combined, and I think he provides good depth. That's a spot that I wanted the Falcons to shore up. Could he develop into a starter? Probably not, but you never know, right? I think he's an improvement at that 4th linebacker spot. I think he's the main knock on Andre Smith. We talked about it whatever that game was that he was kind of forced to play because Caden Ellis got hurt. That might have been the Week 18 game, if I'm not mistaken. Oh yeah, it was the Week 18 game because who was Kendre Miller kept cooking Andre Smith. But yeah, I think Bertrand's probably an upgrade in coverage, but obviously, again, I think the ceiling on him as a coverage guy isn't great. And sort of ideally for me, I kind of wanted the Falcons to get more of a coverage linebacker, more of sort of an athletic guy that could, line up against running backs and tight ends and at least, have a chance to match up with those guys. Cause we talked about it all year long last year, how when Troy Anderson went down, the Falcons did not have a really great coverage linebacker, and that forced Caden Ellis to be more of their coverage linebacker because he was a better athlete than Nate Landman, and that meant that Caden Ellis couldn't rush the quarterback nearly as much as we wanted him to, and so that hurt the pass rush and all that stuff. So that's why I kind of wanted the Falcons to get a linebacker at some point in this draft, particularly on day 3, but was hoping for a more athletic guy that would at least give you some insurance in the event that, Troy Anderson goes down again. But by all accounts, this wasn't a great linebacker class. I think there were some better athletes on the board in round 5 when the Falcons chose Bertrand, but how many of those guys are, literal Boy Scouts? None. Right. So, as Terry would say, it's all about the makeup. And so the Falcons went with Bertrand, and I think he'll be, if he's balls to the wall special teams guy, you guys know special teams matter to me. They don't matter too many other people, but they matter to me. And so that will endear you at least here on Locked On Falcons. So I'm looking forward to see what Bertrand can do on the football field. But we'll move on and talk about the 6th round linebacker, or not linebackers, 6th round players, which included another D lineman. But hey, we finally went offense after the Michael Penix pick. So we'll see if, those guys are going to make the cut. But I do feel like all 3 of these 6th round picks that the Falcons have, are probably not the best bets to make the 53-man roster. And we'll break down why as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So I'm sure many of you guys are checking the leaderboards to find out who got the highest draft grades and, where are the Falcons on that one. But, I'm always checking the leaderboards as well, but not for the NFL draft. It's for Monopoly Go, the mobile game that has been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on classic Monopoly, but for your, mobile phone and whatnot. And you can play it anywhere at any time, right? And you can explore hundreds of Monopoly boards, all while raking in a huge fortune. Charge up rent on your iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly, or you can go after your friends' Monopoly money so that their money becomes your money. You can pull bank heists, you can take wrecking balls to their landmarks, but, of course, you got to check the leaderboards. You got to find out how you stack, who's the real Monopoly tycoon, who's gone bankrupt, all those things. So go climb the chart yourself by downloading Monopoly Go now for free in the App Store or Google Play. Again, download Monopoly Go for free in the App Store or Google Play. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, do also want to plug the Locked On Sports Today podcast and show here on YouTube, the 24/7 streaming channel here on YouTube, the first of its kind, giving you all the lowdown on all the national stories across all the sports. Locked On Sports Today is also free and available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So in round 6, the Falcons got 3 players. They got an extra 6th-round pick as part of their trade up for Ruka Roro yesterday from the Arizona Cardinals, in addition to the 2 that they already had. The one that they didn't give up for Kentavious Street due to conditional stuff. I do think they have to give up a pick next year, though. But anyway, I'll be honest, the 3 players they got, Jase McClellan, the running back out of Alabama, Casey Washington, the wide receiver out of Illinois, and Zion Logue, the Georgia D tackle, I don't know a whole lot about those guys. I've seen a little bit of Logue. Well, at some point I'll take a deeper look at the film, try to get in a game or 2 over the next 24 to 48 hours. But I'm sitting here today without as much knowledge as I should have. But I sort of question if any of these guys are going to make the roster. And right, like that's been an issue for 6th-round picks in the past under Terry Fontenot. Frank Darby, Justin Schaefer, John Fitzpatrick were not locks to make the 53-man roster. I don't think any of those guys were on the initial 53-man roster. Maybe Darby was, but I know Schaefer and Fitzpatrick weren't their rookie seasons. So when we look at Jase McClellan, obviously his biggest competition is for the RB3 spot, with Avery Williams. And so theoretically, he's probably of this group, has the best chance because he just has to beat out one guy. But I have a hard time sitting here today unless Avery Williams is really struggling coming off that ACL tear that caused him to miss all of last year, seeing him unseat Williams, just because, the thing that we always talk about whenever the Falcons draft a running back, and we've been talking about this for, now 6-7 years now, the key to playing at the running back position is not how good a runner you are. It is your ability to hold up in pass protection. That's the key to unlocking playing time at the running back position, especially if you're a reserve, right? Now, if you're Derrick Henry, if you're Bijan Robinson, if you're Adrian Peterson, if you're Nick Chubb, that type of runner, then you don't necessarily need to pass protect, right? But unless you literally the only guys that we're talking about, and Bijan does pass protect, but when you go back over the last decade, the guys that were 2-down run defenders, 2-down run ball carriers, I shouldn't say run defenders, were Nick Chubb, Adrian Peterson, Derrick Henry, and LeGarrette Blount. And 3 out of those 4 guys, no offense to LeGarrette Blount, I know you look like an elite Hall of Famer whenever you played the Falcons when you were in Tampa Bay, but 3 of those guys are basically Hall of Fame or borderline Hall of Fame type of running backs. That's the level you have to be in order for people to look the other way when it comes to your ability to hold up and on passing down. So that's why we emphasize this. For everybody else, having great hands is something, but if you can't protect the quarterback, then you're not going to play. So that is something that McClellan struggled at in college. Based off of his PFF grades, he graded under 28 out of 100 guys, right? Those are Jalen Mayfield grades, right? In terms of his pass blocking, under 28 in all 3 years at Alabama. He gave up 15 pressures on 83 snaps. And, I know in a vacuum, mostly is that a lot? Yes, it's a heck of a lot. I think combined Bijan and Algier gave up 3 pressures last year on roughly about 80 some odd, snaps in pass protection. So, 5 times as likely. And obviously the competition only steps up from, the SEC. I know some of you guys think the SEC and the NFL are on the same level, but they're not, that's why, I'm sorry, I have to take the shot. I apologize in advance, but that's why most of the Georgia players that have come in the league the last couple of years haven't really impacted yet, because there is a step up in competition. Many of those guys will get there. Jalen Carter's, George Pickens, those guys have done well, but we're waiting for the rest of the guys to catch up. But anyway, that's not a shot at Georgia. We'll praise Georgia a little bit later. But finishing on Jase McClellan, couple that, the questions in pass protection, as well as the lack of special teams experience, about 46 career coverage snaps. While at Alabama, I think he does have an uphill battle to climb at that RB3 spot. But again, who knows if Avery Williams was effective in pass protection in his 1 year at running back. And also we know that he's an ace special teams player. So it feels like it's going to be a hard task for McClellan to jump him on the depth chart. But certainly a potential practice squad guy. I don't know if the Falcons are going to carry 4 running backs. That feels like a luxury at this point in time, especially, but we'll see. If he balls out the summer, then, he'll make, have no choice, but we'll see. Talking about Casey Washington, I'll be honest, I hadn't really heard of him until the Falcons drafted him. About 6 foot, 201, explosive, 4.46 speed, 39.5-inch vertical, 10.7 broad jump. Both of those latter 2 figures are above 80th percentile for wide receivers. Change of direction, not quite there though. His agilities were poor, 2nd percentile, 3-cone, 10th percentile short shuttle. So, he's basically really good running in a straight line. That's basically what it is. And so I assumed when I saw those numbers, I was like, okay, well, he profiles as a gunner, on punt coverage. Like that's basically what you want a gunner on the punt team to do, line up out wide, run down the field and tackle a guy, right? But then I looked and he doesn't have a wealth of experience on special teams, only 30 career snaps on the coverage unit. So, the summary that Dane Brugler wrote in his beast, the breakdown that has I think, was it like 700 scouting reports in it or whatever? He says, overall, Washington is a sleek, speedy athlete with secure hands to be a possession target, but he struggles to create consistent separation and needs to prove himself on special teams. So that seems more like a practice squad guy than a guy that's going to potentially make the cut as one of the 6, possibly 7 wide receivers that the Falcons are going to keep on the roster this year. So again, another practice squad guy with this 6th round pick. So we'll see if Casey Washington can do more and surprise in training camp and maybe, make a challenge for, Kadero Hodges' throne as the special teams king. But again, it matters to me, and no one can come for Kadero Hodges' throne as the king of special teams coverage. But we'll wrap up with our Georgia dog, Zion Logue, the last 6th round pick of this group. And again, having talked about McClellan and Washington, it's like, I don't know if they're, maybe of this trio, he may have the best chance to make the roster. 6'6", 314. So big frame, I think he was like 318 at the Georgia Pro Day. So possibly could get in the 320s potentially. And, I saw a little of him watching some of the other Georgia defenders, but didn't do a deep dive into his film. I think he does profile and project well as a sort of space eater at that nose tackle position. I know he didn't get a ton of snaps as a true nose tackle. That was Nazir Stackhouse's job at Georgia these last couple of years, but certainly did get in a little bit in the rotation and certainly has the frame and I think the play style to kind of be that sort of hold the point of attack type of guy in the middle of the defense. All things being equal, and they never are, but we love to say it. I would not expect him to leapfrog either Eddie Goldman or LaCale London for that nose tackle spot. The 2 guys that I think right now are in the potential front runners to be the starting nose tackle in the Falcons base defense, but you never know, right? Eddie Goldman, can you trust that he won't retire again? So, we'll see. And then if let's say Eddie Goldman gets retired and then all of a sudden it's a Logue versus London battle, and then London, tweaks his ankle and misses a couple of weeks of camp. And all of a sudden that opens the door for Zion Logue to potentially, be a starter. And the Falcons found a, starter. We use air quotes starter because again, that guy only starts in the base defense. And that's something that the Falcons only play like 25% of the time. So that's like 15 snaps a game on average. But that would open the door for Zion Logue to be a starter. So, we love the fact that, and when I say love, I probably should use air quotes as well, because I'm sure the Georgia fans are frustrated by the fact that the Falcons only take Georgia players in the 6th round. And they're always like the guys that are like at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of draftable grades. John Fitzpatrick, Justin Schaefer, and now Zion Logue, rather than some of the, earlier round guys. But, as we, the many phrases I say on this podcast, right? Beggars can't be choosers. So at this point in time, if you're begging, you can't choose, right? So we'll see what Logue can do. And I know a lot of people were frustrated with this Falcons draft because they didn't address some of the needs that they want. Why, again, they did draft a wide receiver, but probably not a guy that's going to, impact on offense anytime soon. And they didn't address the secondary, right? And people felt like we went into this draft with 2 potential starting spots open. And I understand that sentiment. Now, we talked about it on this podcast as we, again, no one ever listens to the podcast except for the everydayers. I appreciate you guys. But like clearly, at least a large chunk of Falcons Twitter doesn't listen to the podcast, which is why Falcons Twitter is such a dumpster fire of bad takes nowadays. If they just listen to the podcast, then they would have good takes. But we talked about this a couple of weeks ago that safety was probably a position that the Falcons would punt on, right? We had that conversation with Max Chadwick of PFF, and we talked about how this year's safety class wasn't great. Next year's safety class looks better, at least a year ahead of time. And we'll see if it's similar to the quarterback class where people always say, oh, next year's class is better. We'll see how that holds up. But, I trust Max a little bit. He does his homework on this to say that it'll probably be a little bit better. And, it made sense for the Falcons to run it back with Richie Grant and DeMarco Hellams, right? They already have 2 pieces, on the roster. Again, I know, we're going to have to make Richie Grant Island along with Caleb McGarry Island a part of that archipelago. But like, I don't think Richie Grant was as bad as people said he was. Like, he certainly was underwhelming, but like, I don't think he was terrible last year. I know, again, that's a spicy take, right? Just like, once upon a time when I said Caleb McGarry wasn't terrible and then played decently that season, and similar to Isaiah Oliver. And then all of a sudden people were like, you don't know what you're talking about, Aaron. And then people were like, I love Isaiah Oliver. But, again, I clearly don't know what I'm talking about. But, so I don't expect the Falcons to really do much in the secondary. I think they're going to run it back with at least at safety. And then the cornerback is a question mark. But, again, I'm baffled, guys, because, again, I know I'm sounding like I'm being petty and facetious, but like all I heard last summer was how Clark Phillips was the steal of the draft and he was this 2nd round talent and he was a baller and he was, doing all this stuff. And then he got on the field late in the season and played pretty well until that week 18 game against the Saints. And now everybody's like, we need a corner. And it's like, but you guys love Clark Phillips, right? Like, how can you want a corner if you love Clark Phillips? And plus we're playing a defense that's better suited for Clark Phillips because we're going to play zone as opposed to press man coverage, right? Like, you should be jumping for joy. Like, this is your moment, right? If you were pushing the Clark Phillips as a steal or whatever last summer, like the Falcons are saying like, we agree with you. So it's like, what's going on? But, I understand why, maybe people don't realize that Clark Phillips maybe not as good as they hyped him up to be. I don't know. Maybe that's it. But, you got Kevin King, you got Antonio Hamilton, 2 guys with starting experience, Mike Hughes, starting experience. Clark Phillips now has starting experience. So between those 4 guys, like one of those guys should emerge as a halfway decent, number 2 corner. And, we talked about this at the beginning of the offseason. Now, I know we were hopeful that things might change. Again, I went into the draft expecting the Falcons to use one of their top 2 or 3 selections on a corner. So like, I'm not sitting here going, people are, we've been bamboozled, but, but like, it was one of those things where like, to me, this offseason did not set up well for the Falcons to find their long-term answer opposite AJ Terrell at cornerback. And again, assuming that they are going to pay AJ Terrell. And, I know that's been a topic of debate and discussion. And again, I think all signs show you that like they ain't walking AJ. They're not letting AJ Terrell walk out that door. It makes sense if you're going to have, potentially like $100 million cornerback on one side, like you'll go cheap at the other spot. So yeah, it kind of balances out. It's like, one $100 million guy plus whatever is two $50 million guys, right? Like that's how math works, right? So, we'll see what the Falcons do, but I think people that are expecting the Falcons to go out there in free agency and make a big splash and go and get Justin Simmons or go out there and get some starting cornerback, I think the Falcons kind of aren't going to do that. I'd love to be wrong, but I don't think the Falcons are going to be as proactive in May and June as we kind of initially thought they would be coming out of the draft. That's my guess sitting here today. I think they're going to be pretty content, right? What's the word of the buzzword of the offseason? Complacency. So like, well, whether that will come back to bite them in the butt, we'll find out in September. We got, 4 months to talk about all the things that could come back to bite them in the butt, all the things that could go well in September. But we'll be back tomorrow to talk more about the draft class as a whole. And of course, we'll revisit the Michael Penix thing, and we'll be talking more about the opportunity cost and that whole thing. And then, maybe I'll give you my draft grade before you guys, come and egg my house. But that is going to do it for us here, guys. Really appreciate you tuning in for another sort of live episode. Blue Jacket for life. I appreciate you. Yes, Monopoly Go, proud sponsor of the Locked On Falcons podcast, is very addictive. So check it out. So big things are afoot in Atlanta, right? This team is telling us we're a playoff team. We don't even have to worry about, plugging these holes because we're already there. So that is going to be sort of the conversation all summer long. Are they really a playoff team? We'll find out in September, but that is going to do it for us, guys. Really appreciate you. We'll check out Locked On Sports today. It's all part of Locked On's podcast network, your team every day.